My name is Luna, and I am 31 years old. If anyone were to ask whether I once carried big dreams in my heart, the answer would be an honest yes. For a long time, I imagined myself as a singer, someone who could step onto a stage and hold an entire room in silence, letting every note speak for itself. Music felt like the truest version of who I was. However, life has a way of pulling people back to the ground. After college, practicality won. I took a position as a credit officer at a small bank in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was never the future I pictured, but it paid the bills and slowly erased my student debt, which felt like a small victory at the time. I met Nathan during a college reunion hosted by a close friend. He was one of her longtime friends, and by pure chance, we were paired together for a light-hearted celebrity guessing game. From the start, he felt easy to be around. He laughed freely, spoke with confidence, and, to my surprise, understood the dreams I had quietly tucked away. Nathan once had dreams of his own. In college, he danced with a crew and lived for the stage, but eventually set that life aside to follow a business path that satisfied his family's expectations. That shared understanding created an instant connection. Within weeks, we were dating. Around that time, my mother frequently reminded me that it might be time to settle down. She talked often about grandchildren and stability, and although I wasn't fully ready for marriage, I began to give in to the idea. Nathan, at least in the beginning, treated me with devotion. He planned candlelit dinners outdoors, surprised me with thoughtful gifts, and once bought me a pair of headphones simply because he knew I still liked to hum while doing chores. Everything felt warm, intentional, and full of promise. A year later, we were married. I left my job at the bank, believing it made sense to focus on our home and future. Nathan worked at a financial consulting firm in Charlotte, earned a comfortable salary, and insisted that I deserved rest after years of pushing myself. At first, it felt like I had stepped into a calmer chapter of life. Not long after the wedding, I began to learn more about Nathan's family. He had a younger sister named Ivy, 3 years younger than us. I was told that when Ivy was 8, a severe fever caused nerve damage that left her unable to walk or speak. The story sounded tragic, a young woman confined to a bed and wheelchair for the rest of her life. Yet when I finally met her, something didn't align with the sadness I had imagined. Ivy, though unable to speak, expressed herself through drawings and a letterboard. There was a quiet brightness about her, a calm presence that felt unexpectedly comforting. At first, I felt unsure of how to interact with her, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. Over time, I learned to understand Ivy through her expressions, her small gestures, and the way her eyes communicated more than words ever could. One afternoon, while sitting together on the back porch, I pointed toward the sky and traced a musical note in the air. Ivy smiled and drew a heart in response. Laughing, I gestured back as if to ask whether she understood me. She nodded, her eyes shining, as though we had just shared a private language. If Ivy was a soft, steady light, then my mother-in-law, Linda, was something entirely different. She carried herself with quiet intensity and often looked at me as though I were being evaluated. Every visit to her house felt like an unannounced exam. Nothing I did seemed quite right. Shoes placed the wrong way, towels folded incorrectly. There was always something to correct, something to point out. Being around her left me tense, as if I were constantly on the verge of failing expectations I didn't fully understand. She would often glance at Nathan's appearance and comment with thinly veiled disapproval, saying he looked unemployed and questioning how anyone could respect a wife whose husband presented himself that way. Each time, I would force a polite smile, bend down, and quietly return his shoes to the closet. In that house, nothing was ever casual. Towels had to be folded in a specific direction, clothes arranged by color, and objects placed exactly where Linda believed they belonged. I understood discipline and order, but the way she enforced it made me feel diminished. In her eyes, Nathan was still her little boy, while I remained an outsider, his wife on paper, but never truly part of the family. After the wedding, Nathan and I moved into a modest apartment about 20 minutes from his parents' home. Somehow, Linda always seemed to know when I was alone. Sometimes she called. Other times she arrived without warning, arms full of groceries and opinions, speaking as though I were a trainee rather than a daughter-in-law. I had once believed marriage meant creating a calm and safe space of my own. Instead, I slowly realized I had stepped into a family governed by unspoken ranks, where approval flowed downward and obedience was expected without question. Every compromise I made was seen as obligation, never kindness. What surprised me most was that Ivy, the one everyone treated as fragile and voiceless, would become the person who quietly reshaped my world. I cannot pinpoint the exact moment when my marriage began to change. Perhaps it was months after our first anniversary when Nathan stopped smiling as I placed his coffee on the table. Or maybe it was when his thoughtful messages faded, when he no longer asked whether I had eaten or how my day had gone. The affection that once felt effortless slowly dissolved. He started coming home later, explaining it away with meetings that ran long or last-minute work requests. On those evenings, I ate alone, staring at food that had long gone cold, telling myself he was simply under pressure. As weeks passed, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. When I tried to ask what was wrong, my questions were brushed aside. When I chose silence, he offered nothing in return. The space between us grew wider, heavier. During that time, I found unexpected comfort with Ivy. I began visiting her more often, even when Linda made her displeasure clear. It no longer mattered to me. Ivy would wait by the window every time I arrived, her sketchbook already in her hands. She filled its pages with small houses, playful cats, and kites floating freely in open skies. Through her drawings, I saw a mind that was alive, observant, and deeply expressive, far more aware than her family ever acknowledged. In the evenings, after Nathan had fallen asleep or buried himself in work, I began teaching myself sign language. It started with simple gestures. Hello, thank you, how are you? Gradually, it grew into something richer. It was not merely a way to communicate, it became a lifeline. Each signed conversation with Ivy felt like stepping into a warmer world, one where judgment fell silent and understanding flowed without words. One evening, after I had helped Ivy organize her room, Linda's voice cut through the quiet. She said she could not understand why Nathan had chosen someone like me. Ivy's fondness, she added, did not obligate her to feel the same. I offered no response. Not because I lacked one, but because I had learned that with Linda, silence carried more strength than any argument. Every sentence she spoke felt designed to reshape me, to correct not only who I was, but who Nathan was becoming as well. He never defended me, nor did he challenge his mother's words. Whenever I brought up her sharp remarks, he dismissed them with a shrug and a familiar phrase. That was simply how she was, and I needed to accept it. Over time, I stopped sharing how deeply it affected me, and he stopped asking altogether. Silence settled between us, heavy and unresolved. One evening in early fall, when the air had just begun to cool and the leaves were turning shades of gold, I decided to visit Nathan's parents. I brought along a tray of homemade pumpkin bars, knowing how much Ivy loved them. I hoped the small surprise would brighten her day. As I stepped into the house, I was met with a scene that made my chest tighten. Nathan sat in the living room beside his mother, laughing openly together. It was a sound I hadn't heard from him in my presence for a long time. When he noticed me, his reaction felt distant. He asked why I was there, his tone lacking warmth. I explained that I had brought something for Ivy and set the tray on the table. Before he could respond, his mother interjected, saying there was no need to announce visits because family could come and go as they pleased. The words sounded welcoming on the surface, yet I knew I was not included in that definition. I went to Ivy, who was seated by the window as usual. This time, her sketchbook was absent. Instead, she held a blue pillow close to her chest. When she looked at me, her slow blink felt like a silent question, asking whether I was all right. I smiled and signed that I was fine, though my hands were shaking as I did. In that moment, the truth settled in. I was no longer comfortable in a place that was supposed to feel like home. That night, the drive back to our apartment passed in near silence. Once inside, Nathan said very little. After hanging up my coat, I finally asked whether there was something he wasn't telling me. He reacted defensively, questioning why I would even ask such a thing. I explained that he felt distant, as though he was no longer fully present. After a long pause, he blamed stress at work and told me not to overthink it. The familiar dismissal returned, and I let the conversation end there. Still, I knew my instincts were not misleading me. Something was changing, and I was slowly being pushed to the margins. Not just within his family, but within my own marriage. At that point, Ivy felt like the only steady presence left in my life. What I did not yet realize was that her quiet awareness would soon uncover truths that had been carefully hidden from me. A few weeks later, on a calm weekend morning, I was preparing breakfast when Nathan entered the kitchen, looking unsettled. He placed his phone on the table and glanced at me as though he was bracing himself. He asked whether I had any plans for the following week. The question caught me off guard. Lately, he rarely showed interest in my schedule, and my heart began to race. I told him I was free and asked why he wanted to know. After hesitating, he explained that his family had decided to take a trip to Hawaii. For a brief moment, surprise gave way to excitement. Hawaii had once been a destination we dreamed of visiting together for our second anniversary. That flicker of hope disappeared almost instantly when I saw his expression. He did not look as though he intended to include me. I asked where that left me, struggling to keep my voice calm. He avoided my gaze and explained that it was meant to be a family-only trip. Then he added that there was something important he needed from me. A sense of unease washed over me. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, and asked him what it was he wanted me to do. After a brief pause, Nathan finally spoke. He explained that his family wanted me to stay behind and look after Ivy while they were away. The words hit me all at once, and I felt myself freeze. I had sensed the emotional distance growing between us, but I never expected to be excluded so openly. I repeated his request aloud, barely hiding my disbelief, asking why Ivy could not travel with them instead. Nathan exhaled slowly and said his mother believed the journey would be too demanding for Ivy. He added that I was considered the best person to care for her, emphasizing how close Ivy and I were. The way he phrased it felt calculated, as though he were carefully closing off any chance I had to refuse. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Nathan hurried to answer it, and moments later, Linda stepped inside, her expression firm and unwelcoming as ever. She stated that Nathan had already explained everything, her eyes locked onto mine with quiet authority. Standing in the middle of my own kitchen, I felt an invisible pressure weighing down on my chest. Nathan remained silent beside her, offering neither comfort nor support. She then asked whether I had any objections, her tone sharp and challenging, daring me to speak up. Anger and hurt burned inside me, but I kept my composure. I forced a small smile and replied gently that I would be happy to take care of Ivy. Linda appeared pleased, nodding as she remarked that they could enjoy their vacation knowing Ivy would be in good hands. Nathan turned away, avoiding my eyes entirely. Once Linda stepped outside to wait in the car, Nathan moved closer and whispered an apology. He claimed he never intended to put me in such a difficult position, but said the plans had already been finalized. I looked at him calmly and pointed out that the decision had clearly been made before I was ever asked. He hesitated, then muttered that he had no choice, before leaving the apartment without another word. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by silence that felt louder than any argument. I had given my patience, my effort, and my loyalty to this family, only to be met with indifference and choices made without my voice. Still, one thought brought a strange sense of relief. For the next several days, I would not have to endure Linda's constant judgment. Later that afternoon, I went to Nathan's parents' house to see Ivy. She was sitting by the window as usual, and the moment she noticed me, her face brightened in a way that felt genuine and comforting. In her quiet smile, I found a warmth that reminded me I was not completely alone. I sat beside her and signed carefully, telling her that I would be staying with her for a few days. Ivy lifted her gaze, her large eyes searching my face. Then she signed back something that caught me off guard. She said they had left me behind again. The wording startled me. It was the first time she had ever used those words so directly. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. I told her the truth, that they had gone to Hawaii. She studied me quietly for a moment, then signed something that made my breath catch. She said that we had plans too, and that they would be surprised. I stared at her, unsure whether I had misunderstood. Ivy simply smiled, a strange spark of confidence shining in her eyes. In that instant, it occurred to me that Ivy might be far more aware of this family's secrets than anyone realized. And whatever she was about to reveal, I sensed it would change everything. Being left behind, for once, might not be a loss at all. It might be the opening I never knew I needed. The next morning, I drew back the curtains in my in-laws' living room, letting soft spring sunlight spill into the space. The house felt unusually peaceful. Nathan's family had already left for the airport. There were no sharp remarks, no critical glances, no reminders of what I was doing wrong. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt kind. I brewed a cup of coffee and carried it down the hallway to Ivy's room, just as I always did. She lay on her side, staring out the window at the lavender bush her mother had planted the year before. I knocked gently before entering and signed that I had brought her coffee, mentioning that I had used her favorite vanilla blend. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew. Ivy slowly turned her head, then pushed herself upright in bed. I froze, my eyes widening as if my body had forgotten how to move. The room seemed to go completely silent. My heart raced so violently that I wondered if I had slipped into a dream. I asked her what she was doing, my voice trembling with shock. She laughed softly, and then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and unmistakably clear. She told me to relax and not panic. I nearly dropped the coffee cup. I stammered, barely able to process what I was seeing, saying her name and pointing out that she was standing, that she was speaking. Ivy stepped out of bed and walked toward me with confidence. There was no weakness in her movements, no hesitation at all. She told me calmly that she had never lost the ability to walk or talk. It had all been an act, one she had been forced to maintain for years to protect herself. I stood there, speechless, as memories rushed through my mind. I remembered pushing her wheelchair, defending her from Linda's harsh words, comforting her during moments I believed were helpless and painful. I finally managed to ask why. Why would she pretend for so long? Ivy sat down in a chair and gestured for me to sit across from her. Her expression grew serious, as though she had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. She began explaining calmly, her voice steady and composed. She told me that she was Nathan's half-sister, born from his father's first marriage. From the very beginning, Linda had never accepted her as family. After Nathan's father passed away, Linda took control of everything, and Ivy became an inconvenience, someone to be managed rather than loved. When Ivy fell seriously ill with a high fever at the age of 10, Linda delayed taking her to the hospital. Later, she told neighbors that the illness had caused permanent brain damage. When Ivy eventually recovered, she made a deliberate choice to remain silent. I stared at her, struggling to process what I was hearing. I asked if she had really been pretending all these years. Ivy shook her head and explained that it wasn't meant to last forever. She realized that appearing weak made people overlook her, and being overlooked gave her freedom. Less attention meant fewer questions, fewer restrictions. Then she smiled gently and said something that stayed with me. She told me I was the only one who had ever treated her like a real person, not a burden or an obligation. As she spoke, everything began to make sense. I remembered the looks she gave me whenever Linda criticized me, the subtle smiles, the quiet understanding in her eyes. Ivy had never been unaware. She had been observing everything, patiently waiting. I finally asked why she had chosen to tell me now. Without answering right away, Ivy stood up and walked to the closet. She pulled out a small suitcase and placed it on the bed. Then she looked at me and said that we were going on a trip. Her tone was light, almost playful. She asked if I really thought she would stay behind while the rest of them enjoyed Hawaii. I was stunned and asked if she was serious. Ivy nodded and explained that everything had already been arranged: flights, hotel, tickets. She added that my name was on one of those tickets. Before her father died, he had left her money, and she had saved it, waiting for the right moment. Seeing my disbelief, Ivy grew serious. She told me I needed to see Nathan and Linda for who they truly were. She said I deserved to know the truth, and that Hawaii was where everything would finally come into focus. As I looked at her, I no longer saw a quiet, fragile figure. I saw a strong woman who had stayed hidden long enough, carefully choosing the moment to step into the light. I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I didn't feel useful or tolerated. I felt chosen, not to serve or to endure, but to stand up and face reality. I told her I was ready. Ivy smiled, confident and calm, and just like that, everything changed. The flight departed early the next morning, just after sunrise. I sat beside Ivy in the economy cabin, still trying to catch my breath from how quickly my life had shifted. Only the day before, I had accepted being the one left behind. Now, I was flying to Hawaii with the woman everyone believed was helpless. Ivy wore a simple white shirt and jeans. her hair tied back, sunglasses resting on her face. She looked like any confident traveler. Every so often, she glanced at me and smiled, as if we were sharing a secret victory. When the flight attendant handed us our drinks, I let out a slow breath and shook my head. Ivy asked if I was still shocked. I smiled faintly and told her it wasn't exactly shock, just amazement. I had never imagined that my life could turn around so completely, so suddenly. She took a slow sip of her orange juice and said that sometimes a sudden shock is the only thing powerful enough to pull someone out of a bad dream. I didn't reply. She was right. For a long time, I had been living inside an illusion, believing in love, in family, and in a version of reality that never truly existed. After nearly 6 hours in the air, we landed at Honolulu Airport beneath a blazing sun. Ivy had already arranged a taxi, which took us straight to a luxury beachfront resort in Waikiki. The view was stunning: endless blue ocean, soft white sand, and a salty breeze that felt unreal. Hawaii was beautiful, but relaxation was the last thing on my mind. At the front desk, everything had already been paid for under Ivy's name. She handed me my room key and discreetly signed for me to stay quiet, as hotel staff were nearby. Once we were alone in the room, I finally asked the question that had been weighing on me. I wanted to know how she could afford all of this. Ivy removed her sunglasses and smiled calmly, explaining that her father had left the money for her. She had kept it untouched, waiting for the moment when it would truly matter. I pointed out how expensive everything must have been: the flights, the hotel, the taxi. Ivy simply said that her father had told her to live for herself and that this felt like the right time to finally do so. I nodded, staring out at the ocean beyond the window, letting her words sink in. When I asked where we would see Nathan and his family, Ivy pulled out her phone and opened a restaurant reservation app. She showed me a booking for that evening at a poolside restaurant. Linda had reserved a table for 6 o'clock, exactly matching their travel itinerary. Ivy assured me they had no idea we were there. She had booked us in the same resort, but in a different building, making any encounter impossible unless we chose it. We spent the day resting in the room, sharing fruit and light snacks. Ivy encouraged me to clear my mind, but my thoughts kept racing. It felt as though I were preparing to step into a carefully staged performance, except this time, I wasn't watching from the sidelines. I was about to walk onto the stage myself. As evening approached, Ivy applied light makeup, tied her hair back, and slipped on an emerald silk jacket. I chose a simple yet elegant navy dress. We looked different, confident, composed, nothing like the women who had been underestimated and dismissed back home. On our way down, Ivy squeezed my hand and reminded me not to let anger take over. She said it was better to let people reveal themselves. My heart pounded as we neared the poolside restaurant. Ivy paused and whispered, pointing subtly in one direction. She said that was her. My stomach dropped instantly. I asked, barely able to breathe, whether she meant the woman Nathan had been seeing. I explained quietly that I had seen messages from an unfamiliar number on Linda's phone when she briefly left the table. The sender referred to her as a backup plan. I said nothing more, but my thoughts were racing. When I looked back at the table, my husband was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, as though I had never existed at all. He leaned closer to the woman beside him, whispered something into her ear, and made her laugh. She rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, familiar and comfortable, as if she belonged there. Ivy glanced at me and asked if I was ready. I tightened my grip on her hand, a calm, cold smile forming despite the storm inside me. I told her it was time for the real show to begin. We stopped behind a line of palm trees just a few steps away from their table. Warm lights glowed overhead, glasses clinked, and laughter drifted through the air. Linda was raising her wine glass, her face radiant and carefree. The sharp, critical woman I knew so well was nowhere to be seen. What unsettled me most was Nathan. He sat far too close to that woman, her hand resting on his as if it had always been there. There was no guilt in his expression, no hesitation, no sign that he had left his wife behind to care for a sister he claimed was helpless. Not a single glance of regret. Ivy discreetly placed a small phone and an earpiece into my hand. She whispered that she had slipped a recorder under their table before they arrived. She was certain I needed to hear what they were saying. My fingers trembled slightly as I put the earpiece in. Their voices came through clearly, sharp and unmistakable. Linda's voice cut through first, dismissive and cruel. She said I had never been anything special and had done nothing for the family. She added that if Nathan was going to divorce me, he should at least make sure I walked away with nothing. Then Nathan spoke, his voice low and controlled. He said he would handle it, that he could claim emotional neglect. His lawyer, he added, believed that if they played it carefully, I wouldn't receive a single dollar. He even suggested he might benefit financially. Linda laughed and compared the woman beside him to gold, calling me worthless in comparison. I removed the earpiece slowly, pressing my lips together as the last illusion finally shattered. Ivy met my eyes, not asking anything, simply waiting. I gave a small nod. We stepped out from the shadows and walked directly toward the table. I moved deliberately, each step loud against the wooden deck. Nathan noticed me first. The shock on his face was almost satisfying. Linda froze mid-motion, her wine glass suspended in the air. I greeted them calmly, my voice steady and clear, and remarked that I hoped everyone was enjoying their dinner. Nathan stammered, asking what I was doing there, his composure completely gone. Before I could respond, Ivy stepped forward. All attention shifted to her as she calmly walked toward the table and pulled out a chair across from Linda. Linda stared at her in disbelief, barely able to speak as she pointed out that Ivy was walking. Ivy replied evenly that she had been walking and talking just fine for over a year. She said Linda had always preferred seeing her as a burden, and she had simply allowed her to keep believing that lie. The table fell into absolute silence. The woman beside Nathan immediately pulled her hand away, her face draining of color as the truth began to sink in. I took out my phone, opened the recording, and pressed play with the speaker on. Linda's voice echoed clearly through the air, talking about reclaiming assets. Then Nathan's followed, calmly suggesting I be labeled emotionally neglectful. The words hung between us, impossible to deny. Nearby diners began to notice. Conversations slowed, heads turned, and curious eyes fixed on our table. Nathan jumped up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His voice trembled as he demanded to know what I thought I was doing, accusing me of trying to humiliate him in public. I met his gaze without flinching and answered steadily, telling him he had been humiliating me for over a year, just behind closed doors. Linda tried to intervene, insisting they could explain, but I stopped her immediately. I said I had heard enough and now had proof. I made it clear that I would be contacting my lawyer and that this divorce would not be handled quietly. Nathan lunged toward me, reaching for my hand, but I stepped back and raised my palm to stop him. I warned him, coldly and clearly, that he should prepare himself for the consequences of his lies. The woman who had been sitting beside him stood up, clearly trying to escape the situation, but Ivy called out to her calmly. She suggested the woman might also want to consult a lawyer, reminding her that actions came with consequences. Nathan's hands clenched into fists, his face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. He accused me of ruining his life. I laughed, steady and unshaken, and told him he had done that himself. I had only exposed what he worked so hard to hide. I turned away and walked off with Ivy, leaving behind the soft lights, the expensive wine, and a table full of lies. Nathan chased after us, his footsteps echoing sharply on the stone path. I didn't turn around, but Ivy glanced back, her expression colder than anything I had ever seen. He shouted that I couldn't do this, his voice breaking. No longer confident or controlled, he accused me of trying to destroy him. I stopped, turned, and faced him fully. I told him calmly that he had destroyed himself, and I was simply revealing the truth. When he panicked and said his job could be at risk if the company found out, his fear was unmistakable. Standing beside me, Ivy crossed her arms and replied with sharp sarcasm. She suggested that perhaps he should have thought about that before bringing his mistress on vacation and speaking cruelly about his wife, while she stayed behind caring for the sister he claimed was paralyzed. Nathan stared at her, stunned into silence. I shook my head and told him I hadn't come to Hawaii to create a scene, but he and his mother had pushed me beyond my limits, and now they would have to face what came next. At that moment, the restaurant manager arrived with 2 members of security. One of them spoke politely but firmly, explaining that Nathan was disturbing other guests and would need to leave the dining area. Nathan opened his mouth to argue, but when he noticed the stares from surrounding tables, he said nothing at all. He allowed the security staff to escort him away, his posture stiff, his expression drained, like someone who had just unraveled in front of strangers. I stayed where I was, watching, until he disappeared behind the glass doors. Linda remained seated the entire time. She said nothing. Her fingers clutched the stem of her wineglass so tightly it looked as though it might shatter in her hand. When I turned to leave, she didn't follow. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly was gone, replaced by an empty stare, the look of someone who had finally lost control. Ivy and I walked back to our room in silence. There was nothing left to say. We both understood that what we had started would not end neatly or quickly. Still, beneath the tension, I felt something unfamiliar but welcome: relief. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't trapped in a role written by someone else. I was finally standing in my own truth. The following morning, I called a law firm in North Carolina, recommended by a former college friend. Though she no longer worked there, she arranged a consultation for me with an attorney named Marilyn Carter. From the moment she spoke, her calm, steady confidence put me at ease. I told her everything: the emotional distance in my marriage, the betrayal, the recordings, and the way Nathan had taken another woman on vacation while leaving me behind to care for Ivy. I held nothing back. Marilyn listened carefully, then explained my options. She confirmed that I had clear grounds for divorce based on infidelity and solid evidence. Given Nathan's income and professional standing, she said we could also pursue post-divorce financial support. She added that if the other woman had knowingly engaged in a relationship with him during the marriage, a third-party interference claim could be filed as well. I paused briefly before telling her I wanted to pursue every legal path available. She smiled reassuringly and told me she would handle the rest, reminding me that I didn't have to face this alone. The weeks that followed moved faster than I expected. Marilyn built a strong case using hotel receipts, photographs, audio recordings, and messages Ivy helped recover from her stepmother's old phone. Everything was documented, organized, and submitted. About a month later, the court's decision arrived. Nathan was ordered to divide the marital assets and provide spousal support for 3 years. In addition, the other woman, Madeline Harper, was named in a civil lawsuit for alienation of affection with financial compensation demanded. When the first payment appeared in my account, I didn't feel victorious. Instead, I felt something far more meaningful: a sense of reclamation. It wasn't about the money. It was about finally being heard, finally being seen, and no longer allowing anyone else to define my value. Ivy handed me a glass of non-alcoholic apple cider, her smile bright and proud. She congratulated me, saying no one could ignore me anymore. We clinked glasses, and my smile felt calm and genuine, as steady as the ocean breeze that had carried us through that turning point. 3 months have passed since the court ruling, and my life looks nothing like it once did. The small apartment I shared with Nathan is now a memory, replaced by a top-floor unit overlooking Pullen Park in downtown Raleigh. I moved closer to old friends, as if pressing a reset button, this time without fear weighing on my heart. I returned to finance as well, but on my own terms, working independently as a consultant, finally building a life that belongs entirely to me. I now choose the projects that truly interest me and work only with clients who treat me with respect. More importantly, I have learned the power of saying no, especially to anyone who makes me feel small, unsafe, or unseen. The days of manipulation through empty promises, dismissive glances, and cold indifference are behind me. Nathan and his mother no longer have any place in my life. I remain close to Ivy. What we share now goes far beyond a former family connection. We are survivors, 2 women who chose to rise rather than endure quietly. Ivy moved to Asheville to live with a close friend and finally enrolled in the graphic design course she had dreamed about for years. Once, she told me that I was the first person who believed in her enough to help her live honestly. I smiled when she said that, because the truth was that her courage had awakened my own. One quiet weekend afternoon, as I was tending to the plants on my balcony, the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Nathan and Linda standing there. They looked like shadows of the people I once knew. Nathan appeared worn down, his face thin, dark circles under his eyes. Linda no longer carried herself with authority. She looked tired, almost fragile. Nathan spoke first, his voice weak and uncertain. He said he knew the visit was unexpected and asked if I could help them. I didn't respond or invite them inside. He continued, explaining that he had lost his job after the lawsuit and had been dismissed without compensation. The woman he left me for had walked away once she realized he had nothing left. He added that his father had left Linda and she was now out of money. They had no one else. I looked at Linda. She lowered her head, something I had never seen her do before. She admitted she had been wrong and said she was alone now. She asked if I could help them through this. The air fell silent, broken only by the wind moving through the trees outside. I tilted my head slightly before answering. I told them that once, I had begged them for a small measure of kindness. Now, the roles had reversed. Nathan stumbled over his words, saying he knew I hated him and insisting he had changed, asking for just a little help. I stopped him calmly. I said I didn't hate him. I only regretted the time I had wasted believing he was worth it. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She accused me of being heartless. I smiled gently and told her the truth. I wasn't heartless. I had simply learned how to set boundaries. And my boundary was clear. I would never return to people who had disrespected, used, or betrayed me. I closed the door quietly before they could say anything else. Before going back inside, I stepped to the edge of the balcony, opened a small jar of sea salt I had prepared earlier, and sprinkled it along the threshold. It was my own simple ritual, a symbolic way of clearing out whatever darkness had once crossed into my life. I don't place my faith in superstition, but I do believe in meaning. And to me, that small handful of salt was a declaration of freedom, closure, and peace. The past no longer belongs in my present. Inside the apartment, the setting sun washed the western sky in deep shades of orange and gold, filling the room with a quiet warmth. I sat on the sofa, holding the knitted pillow Ivy once gave me, and for the first time in a long while, my heart felt completely still, at peace. Not every ending is beautiful, but some endings are necessary. This was not simply the end of a marriage for me. It was the end of a life lived in silence, compromise, and self-doubt. And in its place, something far more meaningful had begun, a life shaped by my own choices. Through everything I endured, I learned that strength does not always mean holding on. Sometimes, real strength is found in knowing when to let go. I was betrayed, I was dismissed, I was left behind. Yet those moments, painful as they were, forced me to see my own worth more clearly than ever before. Life does not end when someone turns their back on you. It begins the moment you decide to step forward on your own. And if there is one thing I hope anyone reading this takes with them, it is this. Choosing yourself is never selfish. It is brave. It is necessary. And it is the first step toward a life that truly belongs to you.